Here's a statistic that should shock every Christian in America. Christians get divorced at higher rates than atheists. Let that sink in for a moment. The group that claims marriage is sacred, that preaches family values, that builds entire political movements around defending traditional marriage, they're more likely to get divorced than people who don't even believe in God. 53% of self-identified Christians who marry will eventually divorce. Among atheists and agnostics, the rate is lower, around 43 to 48% depending on the study. This isn't just one study. This is consistent across multiple decades of research from Barna Group, Pew Research, and academic sociologists. Christians divorce more than non-Christians in America. So what went wrong? How did a faith built on the permanence of marriage end up with some of the highest divorce rates in the country? And what does this reveal about the gap between what Christians claim to believe and how they actually live? Tonight, we're diving into the Christian divorce crisis. We're going to examine the data, explore the historical and cultural factors that created this problem, and ask the hard question. Did purity culture and Christian teaching about marriage actually make divorce more likely, not less? This isn't about attacking Christianity. This is about understanding how good intentions created disastrous outcomes. And it's about asking whether modern Christianity's approach to marriage is actually biblical, or just culturally American. Let's start with the facts, because the statistics are stunning when you actually look at them. The Barna Research Group, which is a Christian research organization, has been studying divorce rates among religious groups for decades. And what they've consistently found is uncomfortable for American Christians. Born-again Christians, people who identify as evangelical, Bible-believing Christians, divorce at rates equal to or higher than the general population. In some studies, the rate is actually higher. Among specific denominations, the patterns are even more striking. Baptists have some of the highest divorce rates of any Christian group. Pentecostals and non-denominational evangelicals also have elevated rates. Meanwhile, Catholics and mainline Protestants have slightly lower rates, though still significant. Here's what's particularly interesting. Atheists and agnostics consistently show lower divorce rates than evangelical Christians. People with no religious affiliation whatsoever are statistically more likely to stay married than people who claim the Bible as their guide for life. Now, some Christians have tried to explain this away. They say, well, Christians are more likely to get married in the first place, so of course the raw numbers are higher. But that doesn't explain the percentage rates. Even when you control for marriage rates, Christians still divorce at equal or higher percentages. Others say, Christians are more honest about reporting their marital status. But there's no evidence for this. Divorce is a legal status, it's documented. You can't hide it. Still others claim, nominal Christians are dragging down the numbers. Real Christians don't divorce. But when researchers look specifically at Christians who attend church regularly, read their Bibles, pray, and by every measure are serious believers, the divorce rates are still shockingly high. The Barna Group found that among born-again Christians who attend church regularly, divorce rates are around 38%. That's better than the general Christian population, but it's still roughly 1 in 3 marriages ending. And it's still not dramatically lower than the non-religious population. So we can't explain this away. The data is clear and consistent. American Christians divorce at rates that are equal to or higher than non-Christians. Now, this isn't true everywhere. In countries where Christianity is more culturally embedded and less about individual choice, places like Italy, Poland, or the Philippines, Christian divorce rates are much lower. But in America, where Christianity is voluntary and personal, Christians divorce just like everyone else. Maybe more. Why does this matter? Because it reveals a massive gap between belief and behavior. Christians claim that marriage is sacred, that God hates divorce, that their faith gives them the tools to build lasting marriages. Yet the outcomes don't match the claims. This isn't just hypocrisy. It's a sign that something is fundamentally broken in how American Christianity teaches about and prepares people for marriage. To understand why Christian divorce rates are so high, we need to talk about purity culture. Because purity culture didn't just shape Christian views on sex, it fundamentally distorted Christian views on marriage. Starting in the 1990s and exploding in the 2000s, evangelical Christianity developed what became known as purity culture. This was the movement behind true love weights, pledges, purity rings, father-daughter purity balls, and books like I Kissed Dating Goodbye. The core message was simple. Sex before marriage is sinful, dangerous, and will ruin your life. Save yourself for marriage, and God will reward you with amazing, fulfilling marriage and incredible sex. This teaching was everywhere in evangelical youth groups. Teenagers signed virginity pledges. Girls wore purity rings. Boys were told to be warriors protecting girls' purity. Dating was discouraged or replaced with courtship, where parents supervised every interaction. The intent was good. Christians genuinely believed they were protecting young people from the pain of broken relationships, STDs, and pregnancy. They believed they were setting kids up for successful marriages. But purity culture created massive unintended consequences that directly contributed to high divorce rates. First, purity culture made marriage about sex. The implicit and sometimes explicit message was, if you want to have sex, you need to get married. Marriage became the reward for sexual purity, the finish line after years of repression. This meant young Christians got married for the wrong reasons. They weren't marrying because they'd found a compatible life partner. They were marrying because they were sexually frustrated and marriage was the only acceptable outlet. Evangelical Christians marry younger than any other group in America. The average age of first marriage for evangelicals is around 23 for women and 24 for men, significantly younger than the national average of 28 and 30. And in very conservative communities, it's even younger. Teenagers getting married at 18 or 19 isn't uncommon. Why marry so young? Because they've been told their entire lives that sexual desire is sinful outside marriage. So the moment they hit puberty and start feeling sexual attraction, the message is, get married as soon as possible so you can have sex without sinning. This creates marriages built on hormones and sexual desire, not on mature understanding of compatibility, life goals, financial stability, or emotional readiness. And marriages built on sexual urgency collapse when the initial passion fades and the real work of partnership begins. Second, purity culture created unrealistic expectations about sex and marriage. Christian purity culture promised that if you waited, sex would be amazing. God would reward your faithfulness with incredible marital intimacy. But for many people, especially women who had been taught their entire lives that sex was dangerous and shameful, they couldn't just flip a switch on their wedding night and suddenly experience sex as beautiful and good. Years of purity teaching created sexual shame that didn't disappear with a marriage certificate. Women reported feeling broken because they couldn't enjoy sex after being told for years that any sexual thought or feeling was sinful. Men reported frustration because their wives weren't the eager, passionate partners purity culture promised. Both partners felt lied to. When the sex wasn't amazing, when marriage turned out to be hard work, when real life included conflict and disappointment, these couples felt betrayed. They'd done everything right according to purity culture, yet their marriages weren't the fairy tale they'd been promised. This disillusionment is a major driver of Christian divorce. People enter marriage with unrealistic expectations created by Christian teaching, and when reality doesn't match the promise, they don't have the tools to cope. Third, purity culture discouraged honest premarital conversations. Because dating was viewed with suspicion and physical touch was restricted, many Christian couples got married without really knowing each other. They couldn't talk honestly about sex because any sexual conversation felt sinful. They couldn't talk about conflict resolution because courtship was supposed to be romantic and pure. They couldn't discuss finances, family expectations, or life goals in depth because they were rushing to the altar. So they got married as strangers, and when real life exposed their incompatibility, they were shocked and unprepared. Fourth, purity culture created shame cycles that damaged marriages. Even after marriage, couples struggled with shame about sexuality. Women who had masturbated or had sexual thoughts felt guilty. Men who had watched pornography felt like failures. Both carried sexual shame into their marriages, and that shame created distance and dysfunction. Christian sex therapists report that purity culture has done enormous damage to married couples' sex lives. Instead of creating healthy sexuality, it created broken, shame-filled sexuality that required years of therapy to undo. All of these factors, marrying too young for the wrong reasons, unrealistic expectations, lack of honest premarital preparation, and sexual shame, set Christian couples up for failure. Purity culture, despite its good intentions, actually increased the likelihood of divorce. There's another major factor contributing to Christian divorce rates: complementarianism. This is the belief that men and women have distinct, God-ordained roles, with men as leaders and women as submissive helpers. Complementarianism is mainstream in evangelical Christianity. It's taught by major denominations like the Southern Baptist Convention. It's embedded in popular Christian marriage books and conferences, and it's creating dysfunctional marriages that end in divorce. Here's how it works. Complementarian teaching says the husband is the head of the household, the spiritual leader, the final decision-maker. The wife is called to submit, to support, to follow her husband's leadership. This is framed as God's design for marriage. In theory, this is supposed to create harmony. The husband leads wisely and lovingly. The wife follows joyfully. Conflict is resolved through this clear hierarchy. In practice, it creates power imbalances that destroy marriages. First, complementarianism enables abusive behavior. When a wife is taught that submission to her husband is submission to God, she's trapped in dangerous situations. If her husband is controlling, manipulative, or physically abusive, church teaching tells her she needs to submit more, pray harder, be a better wife. Countless women have shared stories of seeking help from church leaders about abusive husbands, only to be told they weren't being submissive enough. They were sent back into dangerous situations because divorce was seen as worse than abuse. Abuse isn't the only issue. Even in non-abusive marriages, complementarianism creates resentment and dysfunction. When wives are expected to defer to their husband's decisions even when they disagree, when their input is valued less, when their careers and goals are secondary, frustration builds. Modern women, even Christian women, are educated and capable. They have careers, opinions, and ambitions. Telling them they need to be perpetually submissive to their husbands creates cognitive dissonance. They resent being treated as less than equal partners. Meanwhile, husbands feel burdened by expectations they can't meet. Complementarianism tells men they must be spiritual leaders, financial providers, wise decision-makers. But many men don't feel equipped for this. They feel inadequate and defensive. They become authoritarian to mask insecurity, or they check out emotionally. This creates marriages where neither partner is fulfilled. The wife feels stifled and undervalued. The husband feels inadequate and defensive. Communication breaks down. Resentment builds, and divorce becomes inevitable. Second, complementarianism discourages counseling and outside help. Because the husband is the spiritual head, seeking marriage counseling can feel like admitting the husband failed at leadership. Pride prevents many complementarian couples from getting help until it's too late. Third, complementarianism makes finances a source of conflict. When the husband is the sole or primary provider and the wife's financial contributions are devalued or controlled, money becomes a tool of power. Financial abuse is common in complementarian marriages. Research shows that egalitarian marriages, where spouses share decision-making, domestic labor, and financial responsibility equally, have lower divorce rates and higher satisfaction. Yet evangelical Christianity continues promoting complementarianism despite evidence it harms marriages. There's a deeper issue driving Christian divorce rates: marriage idolatry. Modern American Christianity has made an idol out of marriage, and when you make something an idol, it collapses under the weight of expectations. Marriage idolatry means treating marriage as the ultimate goal, the solution to loneliness, the path to fulfillment. Christian teaching often presents marriage as God's primary design for human flourishing. Sermons, books, and conferences obsess over marriage. Singles are treated as incomplete. This creates crushing pressure. Christians believe they must get married to be fully adult, fully spiritual, fully blessed. So they rush into marriage, stay in bad marriages too long, or end good marriages when they don't deliver the promised fulfillment. Here's the irony. Early Christianity didn't idolize marriage. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 7 that singleness is actually better for spiritual devotion. Jesus himself never married. The early church celebrated celibacy and viewed marriage as a concession to human weakness, not the ideal. But modern American evangelicalism has completely reversed this. Marriage is presented as God's ideal. Singles are pitted or suspected of being immature, selfish, or sexually deviant. Entire ministries exist just to help people find spouses. This idolatry sets people up for disappointment. When marriage doesn't deliver the promised happiness, when it's actually hard work filled with conflict and compromise, people feel betrayed. They got married believing it would complete them, and when it doesn't, they want out. Marriage idolatry also creates the soulmate myth. Christians are taught that God has one perfect person designed specifically for them, and their job is to find this divinely ordained match. When marriage gets difficult, people wonder if they married the wrong person. Maybe their real soulmate is still out there. This is devastating theology. It undermines commitment. It makes people view marriage as a feeling-based relationship rather than a covenant commitment. And it gives people permission to leave when the feelings fade. If we want to understand what went wrong, we need to look at what the early church actually taught about marriage, because it was radically different from modern evangelical teaching. First, early Christians didn't rush into marriage. They valued singleness. Paul explicitly said it was better to remain single if possible. Marriage was for those who couldn't control sexual desire. Second, early Christians emphasized that marriage was hard, sacrificial work. They didn't promise that Christian marriage would be easy or that God would make it perfect. They acknowledged that marriage required dying to self, serving your spouse, and enduring difficulty. Third, early Christians never promised that marriage would make you happy. They taught that holiness, not happiness, was the goal. Marriage was a tool for spiritual formation, not for personal fulfillment. Fourth, early Christians allowed divorce in cases of adultery and abandonment, but they never celebrated it or made it easy. Divorce was a tragic last resort, not an option when you felt unfulfilled. Modern American Christianity has inverted almost all of this. It idolizes marriage, promises it will make you happy, creates unrealistic expectations, and then condemns people who divorce when those expectations aren't met. So why do Christians divorce at higher rates than atheists? Because modern American Christianity has created a perfect storm of dysfunction. Purity culture rushed young people into marriage for the wrong reasons and created sexual shame that damaged intimacy. Complementarianism created power imbalances that bred resentment and enabled abuse. Marriage idolatry set unrealistic expectations that no real marriage could meet. The data is clear. Christian teaching about marriage isn't working. Despite claiming the Bible as their guide, Christians are failing at marriage at rates equal to or higher than non-believers. This should prompt serious soul-searching. Are we teaching what the Bible actually says about marriage? Or are we teaching American cultural values wrapped in Bible verses? The good news is that Christians can change this. Churches can stop idolizing marriage. They can teach realistic expectations. They can prepare couples properly. They can abandon complementarianism and embrace egalitarian partnerships. They can address the damage of purity culture honestly. But change requires admitting the current approach has failed. And that's the hardest step of all. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Christian Faith Archive for more deep dives into the gap between Christian claims and Christian reality.